Blair Coyle, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. I'm really happy to have your beard on my screen today.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
You're like a bearded bro with me. This is cool.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So I was just kind of stalking you on Facebook because I wanted to know not just like the cool music you're writing, but it's like, who's this guy? And I saw this really cool picture of you standing in front of the Northern Lights. And I want to know, like, where were you when you saw that? What was that experience like?
That was really incredible, and it was a long time coming because I'm a photographer as well, and for years I've been trying to catch the Northern Lights, and I've been following the forecasts on the Aurora app, and every time I've gone out, they haven't been there, and I've totally missed it, and it's been a disappointment, and I've been out about 15 times trying to do this. And finally this year, with this solar storm happening, I finally caught them in all their glory. And I live in southern British Columbia, so it's not that often that we get them down this far south. So for this special occasion, I drove up one of the mountains, up a logging road here in my town, and set up my camera, and I just had to pose in front of the Northern Lights because it's like, yeah, finally caught them. Yeah. And it's probably one of the most epic displays of the century, and it was pretty magical and transcendent. And I had grown up here in British Columbia in Canada, but I'd never seen that ever before, and kind of missed out on it every other time. And then when I moved down to Australia and New Zealand for about 6 years, and then came back, and it was my mission as soon as I got back to try and catch them. But it took a few years, but we got there.
Yeah. I've lived in Michigan for my whole life, and we moved to a rural spot in like central Michigan, Lower Peninsula, and I've always wanted to see the Northern Lights, and I'm always going out and looking to the north. And then I found these cool apps that will like track the forecast and stuff, and it took 17 years living in our house to actually see them. But man, this year I think we've seen them 5 times now. Then 2 of the times were like once in a like 20-year experience, kind of a storm where it was just over our heads and all around, and like really visible, and like lights are strobing everywhere.
That's unreal.
Yeah, it was crazy. But catching it with the phone, like I'll go out and I'll take a picture with my phone towards the north and be like, are they there yet? Are they there yet?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's the test.
But I got a buddy who lives in Alabama. In the last solar storm, he could see them down in Alabama. Like, it was that strong.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, it was just kind of a red glow on the northern horizon. But like to reach down to Alabama, it's got to be like epic storm.
Yeah, totally. Because where I was, it was to the naked eye, like what you see in documentaries and nature montages. It was like just a bright band of green across the mountain, and like this red glow. It was pretty nuts.
Yeah, and it like moves and dances. And it was
insane.
It was like, I caught a couple of my astronomical bucket list items was to see the total solar eclipse, see the Northern Lights, and to catch a comet. I did all 3 this year.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I got a photo of the eclipse as well. It's pretty nutty year.
Did it come through there, or did you have to travel to it?
Well, I just saw a partial covering. I didn't get the full thing.
Oh. But
it was kind of cool. Like, you got like the kind of crescent in front of it.
Yeah, I've seen like 90%, but to stand like in a field and experience totality, that was absolutely insane. Like, it got dark, the stars came out, the crickets started, the birds went like quiet, the street lights came on all the farmhouses around. I was just like, it was like I was crying, and I'm like, what is happening to me? Like,
that's insane.
Crazy. Yeah, it was awesome.
Wow.
That was like astronomical bucket list. Checking them off.
So good. What a year.
What's that?
What a year.
I missed it again. Damn it.
I said, what a year.
Oh, yeah. What a year.
Yeah.
It has been like absolutely nuts. So I don't know there's nothing else on the bucket list for the astronomical. I don't know what I could see next. So
Yeah,
I'm good,
we're
man.
good now.
I think so. Well, you're like a singer, you're a songwriter, you're a musician, you're a photographer, and you've kind of come through the land of deconstruction yourself. But I'd like to just kind of get your roots. Like, where did you come up out of? What's the soil that your life grew up out of?
Yeah, so I grew up here in this small town called Nelson in southern British Columbia, Canada, and from the youngest years of my life, I was very much rooted in evangelical communities and Protestant communities. I pretty much got a flavor of every kind of popular Christianity that was around. And I can remember saying the sinner's prayer when I was like 4 years old, kind of thing, and went to a small private Christian school. So it was my entire world growing up, and kind of starting out in a homeschool environment that was heavily influenced by James Dobson and focus on the family type values. Mostly just because my parents were new to the faith world, and if something had the label Christian on it, they're like, oh, it must be good. And so I was kind of caught up in the time of, Pokemon cards are demonic and Harry Potter's demonic, so we don't let you watch that and all that stuff. So it laid this groundwork of feeling like the outside world was scary, and there's a lot of fear-based foundation there. And a lot of the message I got about the gospel was, we're born sinful and we need to be forgiven by the blood sacrifice of Jesus. And you have to believe in the atonement, otherwise you're not in, and you might be heading somewhere rather unpleasant. So I think that really subconsciously laid a foundation for my belief system, which I think led to a kind of obsessive relationship to faith and to my concept of God. It was very
Interesting
much
vocabulary. Obsessive.
Yeah.
How'd that
Yeah.
look? How'd that play out? Being obsessive about faith, because I'm racking onto that. Like, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Yeah. So I think I'm just thinking back to my earliest years and the patterns in my prayer life, and it was always this rooted in this fear of, oh, I'm unclean before God because I've done something naughty, or I feel this shame, and so I need to pray again to be cleansed in the blood of Jesus, or whatever kind of charismatic concept, to be able to feel okay about myself again and feel connected to God. So it was this kind of daily, constant checking in, making sure I was okay with God, and kind of like a weird anxious attachment style kind of relationship to a very unpredictable father who is like 1 minute really pleased with you and loves you, and then if you do the wrong thing to set him off, then watch out. And so you really gotta make sure that he's happy with you and stay on good terms with him.
Yeah.
So I think that set a lot of the foundation, and then walking into, as I grew up, a lot of purity culture narratives influenced by a lot of that stuff just kind of led into deeper shame and self-hatred and a lot of spirals with that. And again, just created a lot of obsessive mind patterns. And looking back now, I can definitely see patterns of what they call scrupulosity or religious OCD that was formed from that, which is the foundation of that is really just the fear of not being good enough, and just fear in general of the consequences of not being, it creates this fear in you of not being saved enough. You always have to constantly double check and reassure yourself that you're in, and go to all these conferences and make sure that you're feeling spiritually high and feeling cleansed and that you're on fire for God and 100%, but it's really not from a secure place.
Yeah, that obsessive OCD religiosity, like I latch onto that because as a teenager, I grew up in the same kind of environment where it's like, these video games are evil and these movies are evil and all this music is evil, and unless it has the Christian label. And I remember that like if I had a good day, then I would be like, well, I must have made God happy today because I did the right things. In the morning I read my Bible and I said my prayers and I did all the right things, and then there would be days where I just have a bad day, lack of energy, not focused, and it's really sluggish, and it's like, well, I must have not done it right. I must have had a bad start with God in the morning. I didn't pray, or I skipped my Bible reading or something. And I would always, then I just found out I have chronic health issues. It's like, it was not God at all. It was just, like chronic inflammation that vacillates up and down. But I obsessively thought it was based on my connection and behaviors, that like God was some kind of a candy machine, and if I put the right coins in, then I got something good, and if I didn't, then I was like screwed for the day. And the anxiety that comes with the ups and the downs of that, and tying like my chronic health issues to my performance and spirituality with God, was just like, man, that was hard. I've never thought of it as like a religious OCD or obsessive compulsive something. That's really interesting. I really
totally
latch onto that. Yeah.
I have this distinct memory of, that probably happened a few times, but I'd have my music library that was almost exclusively Christian music, but sometimes I'd feel a little bit naughty, and then I would listen to quote unquote mainstream music. But then I would feel guilty, and then I remember just like getting on my knees and repenting to Jesus and crying my eyes out.
Well, who was your guilty pleasure? Like, who would you go to and then have to repent? Like, what was the artist?
It was probably like rap music back when Eminem was popular in 2010s kind of era.
Yeah, I had the same thing. Like, I got rid of all of my I had cassettes, so I got rid of all of my secular cassettes, and then I started collecting Christian CDs. And I remember I got Jars of Clay, DC Talk's Jesus Freak, and Michael W. Smith. And I listened to DC Talk, and I'm like, okay, I can do this Christian music thing. This is not bad. And then I popped in Michael W., and I'm like, oh God, no.
No,
please no. But then my guilty pleasure was Dave Matthews and Tim Reynolds live at Luther College.
Nice.
Because I'm an acoustic guitar player, and the acoustic talent that, oh man, I couldn't help myself, and I feel so bad because I bought the CD, and I was just like hiding it under my bed. And my pastor at the time, he's like, "You have a secular album." I was like, "I know, but it's Dave Matthews. It's acoustic. I love it. He's so good." But
it's so funny how that works. Like, it's weird because in my earlier years, like my dad had this big record collection with ABBA and Springsteen and all the classics, and I had a lot of fun listening to that, the Doobie Brothers and all that. But then he converted to Christianity and kind of started out on the fundamentalist track, because that's often kind of the first stage. And then he had this Christian radio show that he started, and he would play only Christian music. And if there was any secular music, it wasn't actually the original version. He would play this band called the Apologetics that made Christian parody versions.
I remember them.
So half of the classic rock hits that I hear nowadays, I only know the lyrics to the Apologetics version, like the Christian.
I totally forgot about that band. But it was like the way to indulge in secular music.
Totally.
Was to change the lyrics up a little bit.
Yeah. A little bit of the sound of Silas,
Yeah. I had no idea that like American fundamentalist evangelicalism worked its way up into Canada like that so much.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Interesting. Is there like a difference between the Canadian version and the American version that you've ever noticed or picked up on? or is it all like the same, cut from the same cloth kind of a thing?
It's hard to say because I've never lived in the States, and I can't really compare eras. So at the time, I think it was just a real mixture. Yeah, it's hard to say. Probably depends what church you're at.
We exported that stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
We did.
Yeah.
We definitely exported that stuff. It was good. Christian capitalism.
Oh, all the Christian bookstore stuff, the Adventures in Odyssey and all that.
Yep. I remember going there and you had to get the Christian CDs and the Christian books and fancy Bibles and journals and all the highlighters and the different pens. Do you remember the pens that were for like serious Bible studies that were like, for prophecy you have purple, and for like color coded stuff that you can underline in your Bible? Oh yeah,
that was like a real highlight as a kid because we live in a smaller town and the closest bigger center is like about 5 hours away, the closest place that had a Christian bookstore. So it was like a yearly event getting to go to this place in Kelowna and pick up all the latest Toby Mac CDs and get all the merch. Yeah.
The merch. Yeah. Well, when is a time that things started to shift for you? Like, like, okay, this is not what I thought it was, or like, what were the circumstances surrounding that you started to have like profound shifts or have slow awakenings to like, this is not what I thought it was?
Yeah. So I guess through my teenage years, I had been through several different streams of Christianity in the church. I had been in kind of more of a conservative evangelical church for my youth group years, but then also at the same time was part of more of a, what they would call a spirit-led, charismatic, Pentecostal kind of non-denominational church. And that kind of gave me a perspective of seeing how differently things could be done. So I saw that there were options. I guess that was probably the starting point. And then when I was around 18, I think, 18 or 19, I started realizing that, man, I've been so judgmental, and then the way that we interact with people outside of the church is so othering. And we really have this attitude of we're the saved people, we're in the saved club, and everyone out there is deceived and bound for hell. And that's really the way I'd lived my life and the perspective I had about other people up until then. And something inside me intuitively was like, that's not right. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I was like, either I just totally give this up, or I try to find the true version of this and give it my all. So I decided, all right, I have to give it a real go. And that's when I decided to do that in the best way that I knew how, within the charismatic worldview that I had. So I signed up for a discipleship school with Youth with a Mission, which is a charismatic evangelical global missions organization. So I signed up to go down to Australia and just had a one-way ticket and planned on staying there up to a year. Didn't know how long I was going to stay, and kind of went through a bit of a indoctrination program, that what I would call now, but
that YWAM stuff really does indoctrinate kids. I've watched kids from other churches in our town like go off to like hyper conservative things, and they come back like just repeating what was said to them. They're
100%.
constantly like spouting off the rhetoric that they learned, and it's like such a narrow framework. And then it's like that youth that needs stability, that needs structure, that needs something to latch on so they're psychologically stable. Like they just like wrap their arms around that stuff and just say, finally someone told me what to do and what to believe and what to say.
So true.
Yeah, that stuff is, indoctrination is a good word for it.
Yeah.
When did you when did you start to question even that indoctrination and be like, wait, what is going on with this? Like,
Yeah, so when I went to Australia to join YWAM, I really went into it with a lot of passion and embraced it wholeheartedly because I didn't know anything else. And that's really a pattern with most people that go there. And I took it fully on board, and I ended up coming back to be a volunteer staff with YWAM and spent a lot more time there, which allowed me to actually see some of the holes in their worldview and how practically that worked out, and how limiting and small it was, and how uniform and groupthink it was in a lot of ways, and how controlling it was, and a very hierarchical leadership structure that was, again, quite controlling and authoritarian in a lot of ways. And so that started forming cracks in it for me. And also at the same time, like it's not this black and white thing. Like being at YWAM exposed me to a lot of different teaching, because it's a interdenominational organization. So they try to have people from different perspectives come in and teach. So within that charismatic kind of perspective, I saw and heard different flavors of different theology perspectives. And for the first time, I learned that there were different options on what you could believe about the atonement, that there were different atonement theories, that basically there were a lot of things you could believe about what Scripture was, and all these things that I'd never been taught before growing up in the evangelical world. And that just got my gears turning, and just diving into stuff like the Bible Project, and realizing that what myth was, not everything is literal, and all these kind of things. And then reading N.T. Wright and learning about other views on the atonement theory, and I was like, okay, this is a lot. I didn't know that there was this much expansive option for what I can believe even within the faith. So that started me on a journey of really dissecting things, and I guess deconstructing within my faith world. But yeah, and that just really compounded as I started to see a lot of problems with the hyper charismatic world that I was in, being in YWAM. And I remember just having this year in 2018 where I was really trying to hold on to everything and my belief system there. And I went to this conference in Thailand with 4,000 YWAM missionaries convening. And I remember just kind of having like a weird third person perspective of all of this. Like I was like looking down at everything and seeing this guy at the front, like kneel in front of the stage, like it was an altar or something. And I was like, this is weird. How did I get here? And just having these moments of self-awareness of like, what in the cult am I in? So I just had a lot of these moments and just these realizations of like, okay, where I was a worship leader and we're singing all these lyrics about angels bowing down and the 24 elders in the throne room. I'm like, I don't think that's literal. I'm like, I'm like, it's almost as if the people that wrote this lived in a world that had kingdoms and like halls and castles and stuff. Like, yeah. If this was written today, we wouldn't see that language in there. And that started just unraveling everything for me. And I was like, oh, people wrote this. God didn't write this. And then that just sent me on a whole spiral.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When you really dive into like the fact that most of our dogmatic theology and the language that surrounds it is a contextualization of the medieval world. And then like you look at how much the world has changed since Edwin Hubble like looked up and he's like, that nebula, I wonder how far away it is. And he applies the thing, and he's like, wait, that's like outside of our solar system, and that's really far away. That's another galaxy. Like, that just happened in the last century.
Yeah, exactly.
Just in the last century, like, Einstein revolutionized how we see time and gravity and space, and like the cosmology has just exploded, and the universe is huge, and we're stuck in this like earth-centric, human-centric, medieval language of the faith, and the container just feels, it doesn't feel old in like the, like, oh, this is something, like very authentic, and it feels like dated, like
100%.
like you're picking up like an avocado toilet from like Home Depot, like the Restore.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this just doesn't go anymore. It's just,
Yeah,
it feels
definitely.
dated and not ancient and old and like rooted kind of old, but like just
like irrelevant.
dated. Yeah, irrelevant. Like, it doesn't,
Yeah.
like, that cosmology doesn't fit our cosmology. And
No.
so then the fundamentalists just double down and be like, well, yeah, the earth is flat and 6,000 years old. And it's like, wait a second. Like,
Yeah.
we make these little bubbles that we can control and inhabit. And then all of a sudden science has exploded with knowledge.
Yeah.
And
I remember as a kid being in national parks and just, they're like, and 15,000 years ago when the glacier formed this valley. And I'm just like, ha ha, Ken Ham said that it's only 6,000.
Yep. I remember that. I remember watching Bill Nye as a teenager at some church member's house. And he mentioned dinosaurs and millions of years old. And the parent in the house was like, he's wrong. He's wrong. That was only 6,000 years ago. And I was just like, I remember like not having enough information, but thinking this is weird. Like, why is this soccer mom telling this scientist that he's wrong on his science? Like, just remember like reflecting on that and how odd it was to me.
Yeah, it was just trusting the Australian Abraham Lincoln over Bill Nye.
Yeah. So how long did it take for you to like openly acknowledge, like, I'm questioning this and I'm not sure I fit? Like, what was the journey from that moment of like realization to I've got to say something?
Yeah, so it was that final year, but from 2018 to 2019 that I was in YWAM, that I really started having a lot of clarity as I journaled and took some time away for a little while back home in Canada. And I was able to really nail down like, oh, this is like a very cult-like system and I have to do something about that and try to wake people up to it. I got to get out of here, but I had to like make a smooth transition. So I went back for a little bit, and during that time talked to a lot of people and was like tried to help wake them up. And I did with some of them, and a lot of them were having the same realizations at the same time. We went through a big exodus of staff members there. We went from, I think they went from about 110 staff to like 30 in a couple of years.
Wow.
So I think that I was definitely one of the catalysts in that. It was already happening. People were burning out and shit was hitting the fan. But so I left there and I needed somewhere to go, but I didn't know what to do. I kind of wanted to pursue doing filmmaking because I had started doing that in YWAM and was really into that and had really gained a passion for that. And I thought about doing a film school with YWAM in Brisbane, but then I got a tour of the YWAM base there and just had like PTSD symptoms walking through the base. And I was like, nope, I'm not spending another 6 months in this cult. So
Yeah.
I also had a plane ticket booked to New Zealand for after my time in YWAM, because before I'd come back to be a staff member with YWAM, I went on a road trip in New Zealand with a friend, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. So I wanted to cap off the end of the time with another road trip. I'd done the North Island the first time and wanted to do the South Island the second time. But then at the end of my time in YWAM, I got a call from this guy's mom saying that he had killed himself, and so that was pretty devastating. And also that was my plans to see him couldn't happen, obviously. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm not going there. And then I had a friend who had just moved to New Zealand, and she was like, why don't you just contact this acquaintance that's somewhat connected to YWAM, but that's kind of deconstructed and chill. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. But I kind of ummed and ahed about it, and eventually kind of decided not to do it. But then a few weeks rolled by, and it was like 4 days before my flight was booked for New Zealand, and I just had this intuitive feeling that I couldn't shake, that I needed to get over to New Zealand and just be able to process and breathe over there and spend time with people who understood my situation. So I contacted these people that were connected to YWAM again, and they're like, yeah, definitely come over, stay. And do you have any skills that you can help us out with? And I was like, yeah, mostly just digital media stuff. They're like, oh, that's exactly what we're trying to, that's exactly what we need right now for our nonprofit work. So they're like, perfect, come stay. And I landed there on the doorstep of this guy I'd never met before. I'd met his wife when she was speaking at YWAM. But we really just hit it off, and it was pretty wild to be able to sit there and process with him, because he had grown up in YWAM himself and knew a lot of the faults and a lot of the beautiful things about YWAM in that world, and also a lot of the downfalls. So it was really, really cool to have someone there to land with who understood where I was. And while I was there, ended up getting a job offer through one of this guy's his friends that was visiting, and I decided to move to New Zealand. So came back a few weeks later and ended up living at this guy's house for about 8 months in his suite, and that's when a lot of my process really started unfolding, as I was really just fresh out of the YWAM world and on my own for the first time. And that was a pretty dark season of having a lot of what I would say is like complex PTSD, just feeling very shell-shocked, and from the spiritual abuse of that I experienced in YWAM, of, you know, opening yourself up to the Holy Spirit and having these dramatic, charismatic encounters, but then having those used to manipulate and control you, was quite a traumatic experience to begin with. And then on top of that, the unraveling of my world and belief system is quite a jarring and traumatic experience as well at the same time. So it was a lot of these things just kind of swirling around, and it just took a long time for me to really process it. And that's when I started really diving deep into books like Rob Bell's What is the Bible, listening to the Liturgist podcast, just doing a lot of listening and taking a lot of input and learning. And then at a certain point, I was just like, you know what, if I got to find the truth, if that means I'm not going to be a Christian, then so be it. So that's when everything really started to pick up.
Now, I've listened to 2 songs of yours. I listened to Carousel, and then I listened to the October. Is it
Winds
October
of October?
Winds?
Winds of October. Yeah.
And like I can hear in the first song, the Carousel song, like that struggle of like, I cannot tell what's going on and where my faith is and how to get off this crazy ride. Like that whole imagery of the carousel. And then you released The Winds of October, and like had an entirely different mood to it. Was altogether like I think I've found some grounding here. I think I've found some things that I can hang on to. Do you see those in like the difference of mood maybe being like different areas of your life of like faith processing? One is kind of darker and one's a little bit more lighter, and like I'm finding my way and I'm feeling a little more confident. Do you see that? Did that come out in that music?
Yeah,
intentionally
100%, 100%. And these songs that I'm releasing right now are really my way of telling that narrative and helping anyone who's on that trajectory to kind of find themselves and see that there's a way forward. And it's so true that the darkness and the confusion and the death is so intermingled with the freedom and hope of being in this place of the unknown, but that's also so full of possibilities and new things, and being out from under these oppressive controlling systems of being able to regain your autonomy. So it's like both of these things at the same time. Like there's this death that happens, but there's also this resurrection that happens at the same time.
Yeah.
So
death and resurrection. Do you think we'd be a little more comfortable with that as?
Yeah, I know. So yeah, Carousel is really about, I wrote that in 2018. That was the first song I wrote. I'm releasing 4 songs over the next few months in total. And so Carousel was really written about when my religious OCD came to a head, because I had already struggled with that as a teenager, but then throw in the YWAM beliefs and values of hearing the voice of God and spiritual warfare and all these things, trying to discern the voice of God, what he was saying for every decision in your life, trying to get prophetic words all the time, and then believing that every negative thought was being projected into your mind by Satan and trying to silence that. It just added to the madness, and I was just in this spiral of like, what is going on, along with all these questions about deconstruction and these new ideas that I was picking up on, realizing that all of my foundations weren't as solid as I thought they were. So I was just really spinning, as that song talks about. And then Winds of October, really, it more so tells the overarching story and narrative of my whole journey, starting from this moment. The first lyric says, "It was the night that God died." And that refers to a moment when I had first gone over to New Zealand, and I was laying on the floor in this Airbnb that I was staying at during a weekend away. And I was just thinking about all these questions that I had, and I just had this realization that came to this new level of clarity in that moment. Just realizing this whole angry God construct, everything that I've believed about God, is just a construct. And so I just remember being like, it was just this moment of letting go. And I can remember muttering the words saying, "Let that f***er die." And it was just this moment of release, of being able to like just say those words, referring to this God construct of God that had such a grip on me and created all these obsessive patterns and so much fear in my life, and held me in under such control and caused such self-hatred for most of my life. It was just like, see ya.
Gosh,
so that
moment is like a moment of freedom.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
bye.
Exactly.
Nice.
And then, so the chorus of Winds of October actually refers to kind of the end of my time in New Zealand, towards the end, when I found myself in this progressive church community that was a really safe space to land as someone who was deconstructing. And I was on this church retreat weekend up the coast of New Zealand, and we had this self-reflection time at night. And I was really just drowning in a lot of trauma and grief at that point, really at the bottom of the hole there. And I just had this experience where I just sat out under the night sky, and I just had this, it felt like a breeze went through me all of a sudden, and I just felt the words, "The winter is over." And so that's the story behind those lyrics.
No, that makes sense,
The Winds of October.
because
Yeah,
like you were in the southern hemisphere, and the winds of October means
exactly.
summer's coming, when
Yes.
winds of October for Michigan is like, oh crap, here comes winter.
Exactly.
That makes more sense now. I was just like, I wonder if there's like a play on, I wasn't even thinking like hemispheres, but
Yeah, there's a whole thing there. There's like the metaphorical, the winter is over, but also I was literally in New Zealand and the winter was ending.
man, that's really cool. I've had similar experiences. Like I had to get a master's and a doctorate to like fix me. I was like that messed up. I wasn't that smart. I was that messed up.
Wow.
With my, just my whole OCD religious, fascination with that fundamentalist, like God is angry with you kind of a thing. Like it really required me to do all of this massive internal work. So I got a master's degree in spirituality and leadership. And then after that 3-year course where I learned meditation and different ways of viewing in the Bible and different histories and monastic stuff. And I was just like, holy cow, this has never been taught to me.
It's a whole other world, eh?
I jumped immediately into the doctorate right after my master's. I'm like, I am not done. Like I need some more. And I did a 3-year doctorate degree in the same topic, spirituality and leadership. And yeah, that was not me being super smartsy, getting a doctorate. That was me it might be cheaper than therapy, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, but I get something on the other side. I get a little plaque that says I'm a doctor now. But
nice.
Yeah. There's so many, when you look at how weird the theological dogmatics that we have to set up, there's all of these loopholes that you got to explain away all the time.
Yeah.
You as a 4-year-old praying that you would not go to hell. And
so
then,
messed up.
Would 4-year-olds go to hell? And then, they come in, it's like, well, you're not really culpable for sin until you're 13. And then, then we understand, well, now adolescence doesn't end until, in some cases, 32. It's like, so now, 32-year-olds are the age of accountability.
Yeah, no, exactly. I feel like my whole church experience was every Sunday being like, all right, so this doesn't make sense. So I've done some mental gymnastics this week to try to make this thing make sense. But now this other thing doesn't make sense. So next week we got to do some more mental gymnastics.
Yeah, the mental gymnastics. I saw a comedian who was making fun. He's like, hey, so there's some, areas of the Catholic faith that they believe, they don't believe in cremation because they think you'll go to hell when you're in cremation. He's like, and then I realized you've been dead for a little while when they cremate you. So you're hanging out in heaven. And then some guy comes up to you and is like, hey, get out of the pool. And you're like,
yeah,
why?
no,
Sorry,
exactly.
your family cremated you. They messed everything up. You're going to hell now.
It's so funny.
Oh, that's funny and prophetic at the same time because it's hilarious because it's funny, but it's also pointing out these are weird things to believe.
Yeah.
They're really weird.
Or even just the whole gospel that what was presented as the gospel in evangelicalism just makes zero sense. It's like this God creates a system where he creates these beings to be perfectly with him, but then they mess up, so they're separated from him. But he made it that way to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had to send himself, the human version himself, to sacrifice himself to appease himself, so he didn't have to burn everyone forever in an eternal barbecue roasting. It's
yeah.
What?
It's really weird when you just blatantly say it,
Yeah.
and you're outside of it, looking at it from an objective position, which you can't when you're on the inside of it. Like
No.
when you're totally on the inside of it, you can't see it. It's the construct given to you, and then you have to try and like build the structure with the blocks that they've gave you. And it's like deconstruction. And you're like, why are you handing me this block? Like, did this block even belong in the build? But when you're young, you don't think of that, and you're in like a very cult like environment where they're handing you like, here's another thing that you have to believe. It's not really in the Bible, but we've just kind of believed it, and don't question it. And here's
as a kid, you just trust what adults are saying.
Yeah.
And that's how you form your sense of reality, is just mimicking what's around you. So
yeah. And now I'm an adult, and I'm like, wait a minute, so you mean we don't have this figured out? Because I don't have this figured out. We were just supposed to pretend that we had it all figured out. I'm not cool with this anymore. I don't like this arrangement.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So there's some things that are like really harmful for your psyche, but there's also things that are really helpful and needed for like younger versions of ourselves that needed like psychological stability, a place to belong. Like, where's the lines that, in your experience, between something that's harmful psychologically and yet something that might be helpful and like give you psychological stability? And it might not be like total trash, but we got both things. You said that there's some things that were beautiful and things that were not in your YWAM experience. Like, how do you tell the difference between the two?
100%. Yeah, I think community is one of the biggest things, and the sense of purpose. That's one of the things that I really wrestle with now, is that how do you actually do that while being intellectually honest? Because it feels like kind of the whole approach, like, do you go about it with the approach of like how you tell kids about Santa Claus to give them something to be excited about, and then they realize later, oh, it's just a story? Mm-hmm. Because that's how I would feel like having any sort of firm theology now to center a community around. Mm-hmm. Yet at the same time, I do miss that. At the same time, I do miss that security of certainty that really brought people together, and there was this real passion and feeling like you're making a difference. You're going out, traveling the world, and meeting new people and experiencing new cultures, and you really feel like you're bringing something valuable that's going to help people. And when that's stripped away, it's quite disorienting and makes you really rethink things. So, yeah, I really wish there was a way that we can find how to establish that depth of community while it not being so limited and end up being cult-like. And I don't know, that's the thing. Like, I really like the idea of communal living and all these things, but how do you make sure that doesn't get weird? It
can get weird fast. I think whenever you're involved in some kind of organized anything, the bigger it gets, the harder it is to stay pure to its original intention. But also when it is creedally based, then you're requiring people to agree with you. And I've found a church that's covenant based and not creedal.
Nice.
And so it's like, it's Christian, but it's congregationalism. So there's like 7 statements that say we are a Christian community. These are the 7 things that make us, Christian to identify, but you interpret these 7 sentences with your own conscience, and the Holy Spirit guides you to do that. You just have to figure out, how do I hold these beliefs in a way that keeps me in loving community with those who might interpret them differently?
Right.
That's really complicated, especially when you're in like a political year that everything went nuts. And I had to get up and like, hey, some of you are dancing in the streets and some of you couldn't get out of bed on Wednesday. Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
That was hard. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, it sounds messy. Yeah, there's no clean way to do it. That's for sure. Yeah.
There's not a clean way to do community especially when people get really worked up about it.
Yeah.
But, well, who are some like musicians, artists, thinkers that have been a guide for you and have helped you along your way? Who's been helpful?
I'd say music-wise, one of my biggest inspirations was this band out of Australia called Gang of Youths. And just their honesty about wrestling with real deep questions about faith and life and going through the pit of nihilism and coming out the other side really guided my journey and just gave me an outlet for catharsis and really inspired me to be able to want to make music similar to that myself. And, you know, being able to have a song that in one breath said it's like God is full of grace, and like the next lyric he's not a vindictive motherfucker, is like just very cathartic for a former fundamentalist. So just stuff like that. And thinkers, I'm trying to think. I listen to a lot of podcasts across the spectrum of the deconstruction podcast community, from like the Deconstructionist podcast to like Michael Gungor and the liturgists in different stages, bit of Rob Bell. When I was living in New Zealand, I went to hear Brian Zand and Brad Jerzak, both in the same month. So I think it's just different stages. I needed different things to hear. And one of the things that really helped me along was actually connecting with the Square One group in 2020 that Keith Giles hosts.
Oh, yeah.
And so that really kind of gave me some direction and a space to process things for a few years there when I was in my most disoriented and disillusioned state. So that pointed me to a lot of resources as well, which is really good. And yeah, just having people to discuss everything with really helps.
Yeah, knowing you're not alone. Like,
yeah,
when you were immersed in the cult-like behaviors and beliefs of a, you know, very controlling system, and then you're like walking out of it, sometimes it feels very, you're alone, because am I the only one walking this direction? Everyone else is walking this way.
Incredibly isolating and terrifying. It takes a lot of courage to be able to stand out, knowing that everyone else around you is thinking this guy's some erratic, crazy person.
Yeah.
And it just gets to the point where you just like don't care anymore. You're like, I just got to get out of here. I'm going for what I believe is true in this moment. And you're going to think what you're going to think because you're in groupthink brainwashing. So it is what it is.
Has there been some specific practices that have helped you maintain a sense of connection or sanity on your journey? Like, I got to make sure that I do this thing that helps, like a specific spiritual practice that was helpful.
Yeah, I think learning more about and practicing more in the meditation space and just being has really helped. Just stilling and being more embodied has really helped. And learning about somatic stuff, but with trauma being stored in the body and learning how to release that has been really helpful. And then also living in BC, which is very easy to get magic mushrooms, and it's a very gray area. So psychedelics has helped quite a bit in that process too, combined with the knowledge of meditation and all those kind of things too. And it's time as well. Time and space has led to a lot more stability. And I guess now I don't know what an active spiritual life looks like, because I'm very much like not a Christian. I still have Christian friends, but I just don't know what that really looks like for me. Every now and then I have experiences like prophetic dreams that I can't explain. So it keeps me spiritually open, but I'm also like a big time skeptic as well. So I don't know I'm still navigating what that looks like for me. So I'm definitely not an atheist, but I'm definitely not clinging on to any sort of specific belief system at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, have found more of the Eastern traditions to click for me, and I've been listening to a lot of Alan Watts lately and stuff like that. It's been really good.
Yeah.
So yeah, still on a journey.
I was talking with my spiritual director last week, and he was asking, so what is it that you do believe? Just processing how much deconstruction I've done, and I don't believe this, I don't believe that, I'm done with this, I've let go of that. And just as a good spiritual director, he's like, well, tell me what you don't believe, you tell me what you're not. And I'd like to know what you think you do believe and what you think you are. I really thought about it for a minute. And the next thing that came out of my mouth was not creeds, not dogmas, not doctrines, but prayers that I've memorized.
Mm.
And like the St. Francis prayer. I said I believe in the St. Francis prayer. That's the best. I think that's the best way to exercise Christian spirituality in the world, is to live out the St. Francis prayer.
Is that the Christ beside me?
No, that would be St. Patrick. St. Francis.
Patrick. Yeah, that's right.
Is the let me not so much seek to be understood as to understand, not to be loved, but to love. For as in giving that we receive, and is through dying that we are born to eternal life.
Cool.
That's that whole, like, it's not me asserting myself and my belief unto the world and people and demanding conformity, but seeking to love, seeking to understand, seeking to be a compassionate presence. So that was like the first one that came out of my mind. And then the second one was the All Shall Be Well prayer by St. Teresa of Avila. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, because there's a force of love moving through the universe that holds us fast and will never let us go. I'm like, I believe that.
Yeah.
And like, I just spouted off a couple of prayers, and I'm like, that's really interesting. Like, I'm not so doctrinally, dogmatically trying to draw lines around this thing so much as I'm holding these prayers that kind of guide my being in the present in, I guess, helpful ways. Not very creedal these days.
That's really cool.
But yeah, those prayers were the first thing that came out, and that surprised me. That's why my spiritual director is really awesome. Like,
nice.
He knew that it wasn't a question about, oh, so you gave up all this stuff. What's left? What do you got? Are you still Christian? It was more like, let me probe here, do a little exploration. What is it? What are you about? Right. And those things just like came out. He's like, that's really cool. So
that's a good point of inquiry. I'd like to explore more.
Yeah, it's more like, how are you going to be in the world? What are you going to do here? Not so much as what's in your head. What knowledge are you trying to put up there? I think where fundamentalism goes wrong is we 100% believe that we have the metaphysic for the nature of reality. Yeah. Like, you pull back the layer, this physical world layer, and you're going to find everything, like Pat Robertson said. There's angels, and for some reason they're stuck in the Bronze Age, and then there's demons and they're battling, and then there's God, and there's a Trinity, and there's the Son, and we just think that we have this metaphysic thing figured out, so then everything that doesn't match our metaphysics is a conspiracy against us. Science and culture and music and movies and politics, and so then we got to reclaim dominance to enforce our metaphysic upon people. And I think that whole, like, embracing the prayers is more of like, nah, I don't think Christianity's trying to define metaphysic. I think it's just pointing to the mystery and giving us some tools to get there. Like, that's it.
Totally.
So I can think that's where I'm mostly at these days.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've definitely asked myself that question, but it's definitely been more on, like, what is my belief about God, not necessarily how I show up in the world. I think when it comes down to it, I think Pete Holmes and that clip of him saying, Nothing makes sense. We're on a space rock flying through the universe that's like constantly expanding. And why is it when I take my hand and like put it on this table that these particles stop these particles from passing through it? And it's like science doesn't know. He's like, that doesn't make sense. And so that's kind of my stance with things. But then the question is, how does that inform how you show up in the world? Because I think that's the value of these belief systems, that it does help you structure your life and show up in a positive way at its best.
At its best, yeah, it can do that. At its worst, it's about control and manipulation.
Yeah.
Well, it's been awesome talking with you. Where do you want to send people to connect with what you're writing right now? What's the best platform to hear your music?
Yeah, so a few ways. You can go to my music website at blaircoylemusic.com. You can find me on Instagram at blaircoylemusic. And you can also search me up on all of the music streaming platforms and search for Blair Coyle. I've got 2 singles out already, and in about a week, November 22nd, next Friday, I've got another song coming out, another one in January, so stay tuned for that. And
Nice.
there you go.
I'll put links down in the show notes so people can go and click it. I found you on Amazon because that's my streaming
nice.
service.
Yeah.
So you were there.
Great.
And I was like, oh, he's on Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
pick
got
your
to listen
favorite
to it.
streaming service. I'm there.
You're there. All right. Well, I'll put a few of them down there in the links and everything.
Sounds great.
Well, hey man, it's been really cool. I appreciate you taking some time and meeting and chatting today. It's been fun. So thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.